The Korean Mafia boss accidentally runs into his 8 months heavily pregnant ex-wife working in a bakery. Part 2. The peace never lasts. That's what Haeun should have known from the beginning. 1 year of happiness. 1 year of watching the twins grow from helpless infants into curious, determined little humans with Ji-hun's intensity and her quiet stubbornness. 1 year of believing they had outrun the darkness of Seoul's underworld. 1 year of pretending that marrying Seoul's most dangerous man wouldn't eventually extract its price. It ended on a Tuesday afternoon. The mountains surrounding their home were shrouded in mist, rain pattering against the windows of the traditional hanok that Ji-hun had fortified with modern security systems. Haeun was alone with the twins. Sua was napping, her little body curled around the stuffed rabbit her grandmother had given her. Junho was fighting sleep as always, his eyes struggling to stay open as Haeun sang the lullaby her own mother had once sung to her. The first warning was silence. The complete absence of sound from the security team that always patrolled the grounds. No radio checks. No footsteps on the wooden deck outside. Just the rain and the wind and Haeun's increasingly uneasy breathing. When she tried calling the head of security, no one answered. When she checked the security monitors Ji-hun had installed in their bedroom, the screens showed nothing but empty gardens, empty pathways, empty guard posts. As if the men assigned to protect them had simply vanished into the mountain mist. Clutching Junho to her chest, she moved to wake Sua. That's when she saw it. A piece of paper on the baby's blanket that hadn't been there when she'd put her daughter down for her nap. White paper, black ink, 5 words that shattered their year of careful peace. Sungmin had powerful friends. Did you think this was over? Someone had been in their home. Someone had stood over their sleeping child. Someone had left this warning less than 3 feet from where Haeun had been singing to Junho. Someone had breached every layer of protection Ji-hun had promised would keep them safe. And Ji-hun was unreachable, away on business that she never asked about. The kind of business that required him to leave his phone behind. The kind that meant he wouldn't return until tomorrow at the earliest. The kind that meant Haeun and the twins were completely alone with whoever had left that note. Like this video right now if you can feel your heart racing. Can you imagine finding a threatening note when you're alone with your babies? Comment below. Would you run or stay and fight to protect your children? Subscribe if you want to see how far Ji-hun will go to protect his family when his past comes back for revenge. Trust me. This family's peaceful year is about to be shattered in ways you won't believe. With shaking hands, Haeun called the one person Ji-hun had told her to contact if she couldn't reach him. Min Seo, his lieutenant since childhood. The only man in his organization that Ji-hun trusted completely. The only man who knew every detail of their family situation. Someone's here, she whispered into the phone, not daring to speak at full volume. The security team isn't responding. There's a note about Sungmin. Min Seo's response was immediate. Take the twins to the panic room. Lock yourselves in. Touch nothing. Open for no one but me or Ji-hun. I'm 20 minutes away. The panic room. Hidden behind a bookshelf in Ji-hun's study. Stocked with enough supplies for a week. A final layer of protection that Haeun had prayed they would never need. The 20-foot walk from the nursery to Ji-hun's study felt like crossing an ocean. Every shadow potentially concealing whoever had left that note. Every creak of the wooden floors amplified by her fear. The twins, sensing her terror, remained unnaturally quiet. Even Junho, usually so quick to fuss, merely clung to her neck with his tiny fists. Inside the panic room, surrounded by concrete walls and bulletproof glass, Haeun finally allowed herself to breathe, to think. To remember how they had arrived at this moment when just 1 year ago, they'd believed the worst was behind them. For 12 beautiful months, they had lived in this careful bubble of family life. Ji-hun dividing his time between his business interests in Seoul and their mountain sanctuary. The twins growing stronger each day, their personalities emerging. Sua thoughtful and observant, Junho fierce and demanding. Both of them beloved beyond measure. In those 12 months, Haeun had allowed herself to believe they could have this forever. This strange balance between Ji-hun's 2 lives, the legitimate businessman and the feared enforcer. She had convinced herself that the violence of his world would never touch their children. That the past, Sungmin's betrayal, the 8 months of separation, the lies that had nearly destroyed them, was truly behind them. How naive, how willfully blind. As if marrying the head of Seoul's most powerful crime family could ever result in normal family life. As if the blood that had cemented Ji-hun's position wouldn't eventually demand repayment. When Min Seo arrived with a team of Ji-hun's most trusted men, they found nothing. No intruders. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of how someone had managed to incapacitate an entire security team and enter the home undetected. Just the note, its threat hovering like poison in the air. The security footage showed nothing. 1 minute the guards were at their posts, the next they were simply gone. Not dead. Not visibly attacked. Just removed from the equation with a precision that spoke of professional work. Of resources beyond what an ordinary enemy might command. Whoever did this knows our systems, Min Seo said, his normally impassive face tight with controlled rage. Knows our routines, our protocols. This wasn't random. This was planned for months. Ha-eun clutched the twins closer. You told me Sungmin was dead. Her voice accusatory, angry. They had all assured her that the cousin who had separated them, who had caused their 8 months of hell, was no longer a threat. Min Seo's eyes slid away from hers. He was dealt with, but not killed. The hesitation in his voice revealed the lie they had maintained for her comfort. Ji-hun couldn't bring himself to kill his own blood. He was maimed, exiled, stripped of family protection. He should have been powerless to retaliate. Should have been. Words that now meant nothing as Ha-eun rocked her terrified children in a panic room that had failed its most basic purpose, to give them advance warning of danger. Ji-hun returned within hours of Min Seo's call. His helicopter landing on the pad behind the house with a roar that scattered birds from the surrounding trees. He burst through the door of the panic room still wearing the suit he'd been negotiating in. His eyes wild with a fear Ha-eun had never seen in him before. Not even when the twins had been born prematurely. Not even when doctors had worried about Sua's initially weak lungs. This was the fear of a man who had just glimpsed his most terrible nightmare and found it waiting on his doorstep. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? The children? His hands moved over her face, her arms, her shoulders, checking for injuries she might have concealed from Min Seo. Then to the twins, his touch gentling as he examined his son and daughter with trembling fingers. We're unharmed, Ha-eun said. Physically, at least. The qualifier hung between them, because they both knew that harm came in many forms. That the psychological damage of having their sanctuary violated, of knowing someone had stood over their sleeping child, would not fade quickly. What followed was a glimpse into Ji-hun's true world, the one he had carefully shielded her from during their year of rebuilt happiness. Phone calls that mobilized what sounded like an army. Commands issued in that particular tone that brooked no argument, no hesitation. Resources deployed with military precision. The full might of the park organization focused on a single objective: finding who had threatened his family. Sungmin is missing, Ji-hun confirmed later that night, after the twins had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, after the house had been swept for surveillance devices, after every inch of the property had been examined for further threats. He disappeared from Thailand 3 months ago. No one has seen him since. You told me he was dead. The accusation fell between them like a stone, the first real lie of their reconciled relationship. Ji-hun didn't try to justify it. I wanted you to feel safe, to believe the threat was eliminated. Instead you left me unprepared, her voice tight with anger, with betrayal. I thought we were protected. I thought your men were infallible. I thought our children were safe. They were supposed to be. The rare admission of failure from a man who had built his empire on never failing. This level of infiltration, it goes beyond what Sungmin could manage alone. He must have found powerful allies. The note mentioned friends. Ha-eun's mind raced through possibilities, through the complex web of alliances and enemies Ji-hun had tried to explain to her over the past year. Who would help him? Who hates you enough to target children? The question lingered like smoke in the room, because they both knew the answer was many people. Many families who had lost sons, brothers, fathers to Jihan's rise to power. Many rivals who had been waiting for any sign of weakness. Many enemies who would see Jihan's family not as innocent civilians but as leverage to be exploited. In one night, their carefully constructed sanctuary had been revealed as the illusion it always was. A beautiful lie they had told themselves while danger gathered just beyond the horizon, patient and waiting. "We're leaving tonight," Jihan said. Not a request but a command. "I have a property in the city. The highest security building in Gangnam. Reinforced walls, limited access points, my most trusted men controlling every entrance. Another cage, just more secure?" Haun asked, the bitterness she'd suppressed for a year finally surfacing. "Is this how we'll live now? Running from one fortified location to another? What kind of life is that for our children? A living one?" His response cut through her objections like a blade. "I won't apologize for prioritizing their survival over their comfort." In that moment, the fundamental divide between them crystallized. Jihan, raised in a world where physical threats were constant and immediate, saw safety as the highest priority. Haun, who had grown up with emotional scars rather than physical ones, understood that protection could become its own form of prison. But with the twins' lives potentially at stake, she had no choice but to acquiesce, to pack their essentials with shaking hands, to leave the mountain home that had been their haven for the past year, to step fully into Jihan's world, with all its shadows and sharp edges. The property in Gangnam wasn't what she expected. Not a penthouse like the one he'd owned before their marriage, but an entire building. Modern, minimalist, with the blank facade of a corporate headquarters rather than a residence. Inside, however, the top 3 floors had been converted into living quarters that rivaled luxury hotels in comfort while exceeding military installations in security. "Who owns this place?" Haun asked as they settled the still-sleeping twins in a nursery already equipped with cribs identical to the ones at their mountain home. As if Jihan had been preparing this bolt hole for months without telling her. "I do." His answer simple, direct. "Through 7 different shell corporations, none connected to the Park family. No one knows this building belongs to us. Not even my father." The implication stunned her. That Jihan had kept secrets even from the family patriarch. That he had been planning for this level of emergency while pretending everything was normal. That he had anticipated betrayal from within his own organization. "How long have you been preparing this?" The question escaped before she could consider whether she wanted the answer. Jihan's expression closed, that familiar mask descending. The one he wore when discussing business she wasn't supposed to question. "Since the twins were born. Since I understood what I stood to lose." The anger she'd been suppressing flared hot and sharp. "You've been expecting this for a year and never thought to warn me? To prepare me? You left me vulnerable while you made contingency plans. I was trying to give you peace." His voice rose to match hers, the rare loss of control revealing the strain he was under. "To give you and the twins some semblance of normal life before." He stopped, as if catching himself before revealing too much. "Before what, Jihan?" She stepped closer, forcing him to look her in the eyes. "What haven't you told me?" The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire about to snap. Finally, he spoke, each word measured and heavy. "The Park family has enemies. Always has. My father made peace with most during his time as head. But there are still those who remember old grievances. Who would see our family destroyed if given the opportunity." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I've been managing these threats for years, containing them. But since marrying you, since the twins, there have been whispers that I've grown soft, that my priorities have shifted, that I might be leveraged through those I love. And you didn't think I deserved to know this?" The betrayal cut deeper than she could have anticipated. "You let me believe we were safe while knowing all along it was temporary? Would it have changed anything? He challenged, his eyes dark with emotion rarely displayed so openly. Would you have raised our children differently if you knew they were born with targets on their backs? Would you have loved me less if you understood the full consequences of being a park? The questions hung in the air between them, impossible to answer without admitting truths neither wanted to face. That perhaps their love had always been built on selective blindness. That Ha-eun had chosen to ignore the darker aspects of Ji-hun's world, just as he had chosen to shield her from its full reality. Their argument was interrupted by Min Seo's arrival, his face grave with news that couldn't wait until morning. We've identified who helped Sung-min, he said without preamble. The Hong family, their resources, their people, their technology. The name hit Ji-hun like a physical blow. Ha-eun saw it in the sudden tension in his shoulders, in the way his hand instinctively moved to where he usually carried his gun. You're certain? His voice had changed, become the cold, controlled tone she recognized from business calls, from moments when decisions about life and death were being made. Min Seo nodded once. We captured one of the men who breached the security system. He confessed after persuasion. Ha-eun didn't ask what form that persuasion had taken. Some questions were better left unasked in Ji-hun's world. Who are the Hongs? She asked instead, needing to understand the enemy who had violated their home, who had threatened their children. Ji-hun exchanged a look with Min Seo before answering. Old money. Very old. They control shipping routes throughout Asia. Legitimate business on the surface, but their real power comes from what moves through those shipping containers unregistered. Weapons, drugs, people. They were untouchable for decades because they had government protection at the highest levels. Were untouchable? Ha-eun caught the past tense. My father challenged their monopoly 15 years ago. There was conflict. The careful choice of words telling her everything about the nature of that conflict. Eventually, a truce was negotiated, territories divided, agreements made. They've kept to their side of the line, we've kept to ours. Until now, Min Seo added. Until they sheltered Sung-min and gave him the resources to retaliate against you personally. The implications were staggering. Not just a disgraced cousin seeking revenge, but a powerful family deliberately breaking a long-standing peace, supporting an internal threat to the Park family. Targeting not just Ji-hun but his wife and children. This wasn't just danger. This was war. If you're feeling the tension between these two worlds colliding, smash that like button now. Would you choose safety or freedom if you were Ha-eun? Comment below what you would do in her impossible situation. Are you watching from Korea, America, or somewhere else? Let me know in the comments where this story is reaching you. Subscribe right now because the ultimate betrayal is coming. And you won't believe what Ji-hun might have to sacrifice to keep his family safe. The days that followed their move to the Gangnam safe house established a new normal that felt anything but normal to Ha-eun. Armed men in every corridor. Windows that couldn't be opened. The constant hum of surveillance equipment monitoring every approach to the building. The twins confined to 3 floors of sterile luxury. Their outdoor playtime now limited to a rooftop garden, surrounded by bulletproof glass. Ji-hun was present physically but absent in every other way. Constantly on his phone. Constantly in meetings with lieutenants and soldiers whose names Ha-eun wasn't allowed to know. Constantly planning responses to threats she was no longer shielded from understanding. She watched her husband transform from the man who had held their children with trembling hands to the criminal leader whose name made even hardened men lower their eyes in deference. Watched the tenderness she treasured being buried beneath layers of calculated violence, of strategic ruthlessness. It was as if 2 Ji-huns existed simultaneously. The father who still sang lullabies in his surprisingly gentle baritone, and the Mafia boss who dispatched men with orders that made them pale beneath their expensive suits. 1 week into this new existence, the bakery was targeted. Not her grandmother's original small shop, but the flagship store of what had become a successful chain under Minji's guidance and Ji-hun's financial backing. An arson attempt that nearly claimed Minji's life, stopped only by the security team Ji-hun had insisted on providing despite the old woman's protests. Ha-eun received the news from Ji-hun himself. his face carefully composed as he told her that her grandmother was safe, but the bakery, that beautiful space they had designed together, that represented her family's legacy, was now a charred shell. "They're escalating," he said, watching her reaction with those observant eyes that missed nothing, "testing how far they can go, how much they can take from us before I respond." "And how will you respond?" she asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear him say it. Needing confirmation that the man she had married was still capable of the violence his reputation was built upon. "With finality," he said simply. "The Hongs have broken the truce. They've chosen to target my family rather than my business. That requires a different kind of answer than my father would have given." The coldness in his voice should have frightened her, should have reminded her of all the reasons she had hesitated to bind her life to his in the first place. Instead, she felt a dark satisfaction. Tyan, a primal need to see those who had threatened her children, who had nearly killed her grandmother, made to pay. What did that make her? Was she becoming like him? Was his world infecting hers, just as she had always feared? "I want you and the twins to go abroad," Ji-hun said that night, after they had put the children to bed. "Europe, perhaps. Or America. Somewhere beyond the Hong's immediate reach. Until this is resolved. You want us to run? To leave you?" The suggestion ignited something fierce and stubborn within her. To be separated again. "I want you safe," he corrected, his tone brooking no argument. "I can't focus on eliminating this threat if I'm constantly worried about you and the children being caught in the crossfire." "And how long will this separation last?" she demanded. "Weeks? Months? Years? What happens if this escalates beyond the Hongs? If you eliminate them only to face retaliation from their allies? Do we spend our lives running from one safe house to another, always separated whenever danger appears?" The question hung between them, exposing the fundamental incompatibility of their worlds. Ji-hun, raised to see threats in every shadow, would always prioritize physical safety above all else. Ha-eun, who had grown up with the emotional scars of abandonment, would always fear separation more than physical danger. "I won't be separated from you again," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "Not after what happened with Sungmin. Not after 8 months of believing you had moved on without me. If we face this, we face it together. The twins need both parents. Not a father who appears when it's convenient and disappears when it's dangerous." The words struck deeper than she'd intended, touching on Ji-hun's most vulnerable point. His fear of becoming like his own father, who had been more myth than presence during his childhood, who had placed family business above family itself. "This isn't about convenience," he said, anger threading through his carefully controlled voice. "This is about survival, about doing whatever is necessary to ensure our children have a future." What kind of future will they have if they're raised in constant fear, in isolation, if they learn that the world is too dangerous to engage with? Ha-eun challenged. "Is that what you want for them? To inherit your paranoia along with your business?" The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had gone too far, had struck at something too raw, too close to Ji-hun's deepest insecurities. The flash of hurt in his eyes before his expression closed completely told her everything about the damage her words had inflicted. "My paranoia," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft, "is what has kept our family alive. What allowed you to spend a year in that mountain house believing you were safe. What gives our children the luxury of growing up at all." Without another word, he turned and left their bedroom, the door closing behind him with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than if he had slammed it in anger. Controlled to the end, even in pain, even in betrayal by the one person he had allowed past his defenses. Ha-eun sank onto their bed, the full weight of their situation finally breaking through her careful composure. This was the reality she had chosen when she married Ji-hun Park, when she accepted the jade necklace that symbolized her place in his world, when she bore his children, creating heirs to a legacy built on blood as much as business. The next morning, Ji-hun was gone before she woke. A note on his pillow, not romantic but informational. He would be handling the situation for the next several days. She and the twins were to remain in the safe house. Additional security had been assigned. He would call when possible. The detachment of the message hurt more than anger would have. As if he had retreated fully into the role of crime boss, leaving no room for the husband and father she had glimpsed during their year of happiness. 3 days passed with no word. 3 days of Haun attempting to create normalcy for the twins in their gilded cage. Of trying to explain to Sua, advanced beyond her 15 months, why they couldn't go outside to see the flowers. Of watching Junho's frustration grow as he threw himself against boundaries. He was too young to understand but old enough to resent. On the 4th day, Haun discovered what Ji-hun had been doing during his absence. Not from him directly, he still hadn't called, but from a news report that appeared on her tablet during her morning coffee. A warehouse explosion in Incheon. 3 buildings destroyed. Casualties estimated at 15, possibly more. The report didn't mention the Park family. Didn't need to. Haun knew with cold certainty that this was Ji-hun's response to the bakery arson. His declaration of open warfare against the Hongs. This was what he had been shielding her from all along. Not just the threats against them, but his own capacity for violence when those he loved were endangered. The ruthlessness that had established his reputation. The willingness to eliminate enemies so completely that others would think twice before crossing him. She should have been horrified. Should have been repulsed by the knowledge that the man who held their children with such gentleness could order deaths without hesitation. Instead, she felt a complicated mixture of relief and vindication. Of gratitude that Ji-hun would go to such lengths to protect what was his. Of dark satisfaction that those who had threatened their children were learning the consequences of their actions. What did that make her? Not just the wife of a criminal but his partner in a moral sense. Complicit in violence she would once have condemned without hesitation. Before she could examine these uncomfortable questions further, Min Seo appeared at her door. His expression even more grave than usual, which she wouldn't have thought possible. "You need to come with me," he said without preamble. "Ji-hun has requested your presence." "Where?" she asked, immediately concerned. Ji-hun had been adamant about her remaining in the safe house. For him to summon her now meant something significant had changed. "His father's house. There's a meeting. It's important that you attend." The summons to the Park family patriarch's home was unprecedented. In the 2 years since her relationship with Ji-hun had begun, Haun had met his father exactly 3 times. Their wedding, the twins' birth, their 100-day celebration. Each encounter formal, traditional, laden with unspoken tensions about her suitability as a Park wife. Now she was being called to his home, to some meeting Ji-hun deemed important enough to risk her safety. Important enough to expose her to whatever judgment his father might pass on their current situation. The Park family compound was everything Haun had imagined and nothing like she expected. Traditional Korean architecture surrounded by walls that wouldn't have looked out of place in a medieval fortress. Gardens so perfectly maintained they seemed almost artificial. Security that made their mountain home look unprotected by comparison. Min Seo led her through corridors lined with priceless art, past rooms where men in expensive suits waited with the particular stillness of predators at rest, to a traditional meeting room where Ji-hun stood facing his father across a low table, their postures suggesting an argument interrupted by her arrival. Ji-hun's eyes met hers briefly, conveying both warning and apology before his expression settled back into the mask she had come to recognize as his business face. His father, a man whose health had been failing for years but whose presence still commanded absolute deference, studied her with eyes so similar to Ji-hun's it was like looking into her husband's future. "Daughter-in-law," the elder Park said, using formal Korean that established both her position and its boundaries. "You honor us with your presence." The traditional greeting, delivered without warmth but with perfect courtesy. Haun returned it with a deep bow, hyper-aware of being judged not just as Ji-hun's wife but as the mother of the Park heirs, as a woman whose actions would reflect on the family name for generations to come. "You have been told of our situation?" the old man asked, gesturing for her to sit opposite him. Ji-hun remained standing, his posture suggesting he was prepared to intervene if necessary. "I know the Hongs have allied with Sung Min," she said carefully. "That they've targeted our family directly rather than maintaining the truce your administration's established." The formal language felt strange on her tongue, but she understood its importance in this setting. This wasn't a family discussion. This was a war council, and she was being assessed as a potential asset or liability. The elder Park nodded once, approval flickering briefly across his otherwise impassive face. "My son believes direct confrontation is our only option. That the Hongs must be eliminated completely to ensure your children's safety." The bluntness of the statement shocked her, though it shouldn't have. This was how decisions were made in the Park family. Directly, without euphemism or pretense. "And you disagree?" she asked, sensing the conflict that had been interrupted by her arrival. "I believe there are always alternatives to total war," the old man said, his gaze shifting to his son. "Particularly when the enemy has resources that could destroy everything we've built over 3 generations. Ji-hun's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of his frustration. "The Hongs targeted my wife and children. They helped Sung Min breach our security. They nearly killed Haun's grandmother. These are not actions that can be negotiated away." "No," his father agreed, "but they can be balanced against other considerations. Other forms of retaliation that don't risk everything we've built." Haun looked between them, trying to understand what wasn't being said. What alternative the elder Park was suggesting that had caused such tension between father and son. "The Hong family has a daughter," the old man said finally, his eyes returning to Haun. "Mi-jin, 24, educated overseas, being groomed to eventually take over their legitimate business interests. And?" Haun prompted when he paused, though dread was already building in her stomach. She had lived in Korea long enough to understand how traditional families resolved conflicts. And a marriage alliance would end this conflict permanently, would bind our families through bonds stronger than any truce or territorial agreement. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. A marriage alliance. The traditional solution to feuding families throughout Korean history. The joining of bloodlines to ensure peace where words and promises had failed. Haun's eyes snapped to Ji-hun, horror and betrayal constricting her throat. "You're considering this? After everything? After us?" "Not for me," Ji-hun said immediately, his voice sharp with barely controlled anger. "Never for me. My father is suggesting my sister Soo-jin for this alliance." Relief flooded through her so intensely it left her lightheaded. Not Ji-hun, not her husband, not a repetition of her greatest fear, that she would be set aside for family obligation, for business necessity. "Your sister?" she repeated, trying to process this new information. "But she's only 18. She's still in university." "She's of legal age," the elder Park said dismissively. "And the Hong girl is educated, sophisticated. Not the worst match for a daughter whose other options would be limited by our family name." The casual sacrifice of his daughter's future for family business struck Haun with physical force. The willingness to use a child because at 18 Soo-jin was still very much a child in many ways, as currency in a power struggle. As a solution to a problem created by men's ambitions and grievances. "No." The word escaped before she could consider its implications. Before she could remember her place in this family's hierarchy. Before she could recall that daughters-in-law did not contradict patriarchs in traditional Korean families. Both men stared at her, shock evident on Ji-hun's face, something closer to curiosity on his father's. "Excuse me?" the elder Park said, his tone suggesting he must have misheard. "I said no," Haun repeated, her voice stronger now, certainty replacing fear. "Soo-jin will not be sacrificed to solve a problem she didn't create. We will not perpetuate the cycle of using women as peace offerings between warring men." The silence that followed her declaration was absolute. Even the birds in the garden beyond the open doors seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the elder Park's response to this unprecedented defiance. To Haun's shock, the old man laughed. A rusty sound, as if long and used, but genuine. Now I understand why my son risked everything to find you, he said, his eyes assessing her with new respect. You have the backbone this family needs in its women. Before she could respond to this unexpected approval, Ji-hun stepped forward, his expression hardened into decision. There will be no marriage alliance, he said firmly. Not with my sister, not with anyone. The Hongs crossed a line when they targeted my children, when they violated my home. They will receive the response such actions deserve. Even if it means war, his father challenged. Even if it risks everything we've built? Even then, Ji-hun's resolve was absolute. Some lines cannot be crossed without consequences. Some actions cannot be forgiven for the sake of business. The elder Park studied his son for a long moment, something like pride flickering briefly across his weathered face. Very well. Your children, your decision. But remember, when you go to war, you must be prepared to win completely or lose everything. There is no middle ground once blood has been spilled. The warning hung in the air between them, weighted with generations of similar decisions. Of similar moments when the Park family had chosen violence over compromise, had risked everything to maintain respect and fear in equal measure. This was the legacy the twins would inherit. The world they would grow up in, regardless of how much Ha-eun might wish to shield them from its harsh realities. The knowledge settled on her shoulders like a physical weight, pressing her into the reality she had been avoiding since the day Ji-hun walked into her bakery and recognized her despite her swollen belly. Despite her attempt to build a life separate from his. They were Parks now, all of them, bound by blood and name to this world of calculated risks and necessary violence. Of family loyalty that transcended individual choice or comfort. As they left the compound, Ji-hun reached for her hand. A small gesture, but significant in the context of his father's home, where public displays of affection were considered vulgar. A silent acknowledgement of her courage in challenging the patriarch. A reaffirmation of their partnership despite the strain of recent days. I would never have agreed to it, he said quietly as they walked toward the waiting car. Never have sacrificed Sujin that way, but I needed my father to believe I was considering all options. Needed to buy time while my men positioned themselves. Positioned themselves for what? Ha-eun asked, though she already knew the answer. Could see it in the grim determination that had settled over him like armor. For what comes next? He squeezed her hand once before releasing it as they reached the car. For the end of this threat, once and for all. The promise should have reassured her. Should have made her feel protected, valued, prioritized above even family obligation and business necessity. Instead, it left her cold with dread. With the certainty that whatever came next would transform their lives in ways neither could fully predict or control. That night, after returning to the safe house, after tucking the twins into their beds with extra kisses and whispered reassurances, Ha-eun discovered exactly what Ji-hun had been planning during his 3-day absence. Not from him directly. He was once again locked in meetings with his lieutenants, but from documents left carelessly visible on his tablet when she entered his study with a cup of tea. Battle plans. There was no other way to describe the detailed strategies laid out on the screen. Approaches to Hong properties across Seoul. Security assessments. Vulnerabilities identified with clinical precision. Resources allocated for what could only be described as a coordinated attack on multiple fronts. This wasn't retaliation for specific grievances. This was the complete elimination of a rival family. The kind of action that would leave no survivors, no possibility of future revenge. The kind of violence that would reshape Seoul's criminal landscape for generations to come. And it was scheduled to begin tomorrow night. If you believe love can survive even the darkest challenges, like this video now and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Comment below if you think Ha-eun and Ji-hun have finally found their balance, or if their world will always be threatened. Are you excited for their new baby announcement? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe and turn on notifications because I'm working on a special story about their twins growing up between two worlds, the legitimate bakery empire and their father's shadowy legacy. Some children inherit businesses. These two will inherit an empire built on both flour and fear.